In a world where wealth and heartache collide, one woman's journey to find closure leads to an unexpected discovery. Join us as we unveil the powerful story of Eleanor Grace, a billionaire grappling with the loss of her only son, and the young mother who holds the key to a future she never knew she needed. This is a tale of love, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of family. It was a rainy afternoon when Eleanor Grace, one of the richest women in the country, stepped out of her sleek black car. The sky was a heavy gray, the kind of gray that seemed to swallow all light and warmth. Rain drizzled steadily, turning the gravel path of the cemetery into a glistening ribbon of black and silver. Eleanor Grace stood motionless for a moment, staring ahead through the misty air, her leather gloves gripping the handle of a black umbrella. Her driver opened the door for her, but she waved him off. "I need to do this alone," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the soft hiss of falling rain. She stepped out, her polished heels clicking against the wet stone. The cold wind cut through even her designer wool coat, but she didn't flinch. She wasn't here to care about weather or comfort. She was here for Michael. Clutched tightly in her hand was a single white rose. Its petals, perfect and unblemished, trembled in the breeze. Every year since that horrific night she had come here. And every year it felt harder. Michael, her only son, her pride, her joy, her one reason for surviving after her husband's death, a decade earlier. Now he was gone too, snatched away at only 26 in a brutal car accident on a rain-slicked highway. Eleanor had arrived too late that night to say goodbye. The guilt gnawed at her even now. She walked slowly between rows of headstones, her sharp eyes fixed ahead, but her thoughts lost in memory. He used to call me every Sunday, she thought, a pang stabbing her chest. Why didn't I call him that night? At last she reached it. Michael's grave sat under an old oak tree, its bare branches swaying above like skeletal fingers. The marble headstone gleamed in the rain, simple yet elegant. Michael Jonathan Grace, 1993 to 2022, beloved son, forever in our hearts. The words blurred as her eyes filled with tears. She knelt carefully, her knees pressing into the cold, damp earth, and placed the rose gently on the grave. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's me again." She brushed her gloved fingers over his name as if she could somehow touch him through the stone. "I'm so sorry, my boy," she choked out, her throat tight. "I should have been there. I should have protected you. What kind of mother lets her son die alone?" Rain dripped from her umbrella onto her shoulders, but she didn't care. The only sound was the wind sighing through the trees and the faint patter of raindrops on leaves. But then she heard it. A sound. Soft. Barely there. A sob. Eleanor's head snapped up. At first she thought her mind was playing tricks on her. The cemetery was empty. Her driver was waiting by the car. And no one else should be here in this weather. But then she heard it again. A muffled cry. She slowly stood, her heart thudding louder now, and turned her head toward the sound. Just beyond Michael's grave, under the drooping branches of the oak, sat a woman. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with rain-soaked hair clinging to her cheeks. Her thin jacket was no match for the cold. She sat on the wet grass, her arms wrapped protectively around a small child who was curled in her lap. The woman's shoulders shook as she cried silently, her face buried against the child's tiny head. Eleanor froze, 1,000 questions colliding in her mind. Who is she? What is she doing here? The woman hadn't noticed her yet. Eleanor's sharp eyes swept over her quickly. The young woman's shoes were scuffed. Her clothes looked cheap, the kind of fabric that clings in the rain. And yet there was something in her posture, something deeply protective about the way she held the child. Eleanor's gaze shifted to the little boy. He couldn't have been more than 2. His small face was pressed into the woman's chest, but as he turned slightly, Eleanor caught a glimpse of his eyes. Something in her chest tightened painfully. Those eyes. They were wide, innocent, and impossibly familiar. Eleanor felt her throat constrict. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The woman finally looked up, startled by the sound of Eleanor's umbrella shifting. Her tear-streaked face registered shock and fear. I'm sorry," the woman stammered, clutching the boy tighter. "I didn't mean to, I'll leave right now." But Eleanor's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Wait." The woman froze. Rain dripped from her chin as she stared at the older woman standing like a statue, her elegant coat and cold expression making her seem almost regal. Eleanor took a step closer, her pulse roaring in her ears. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Why are you crying by this grave?" The young woman swallowed hard, her lip trembling. She looked down at the boy, then back at Eleanor. And in a voice so soft it was almost drowned out by the rain, she whispered, "Because this is his father's grave." Just a few steps away, under the gnarled branches of the oak tree, Eleanor saw her. A young black woman sat on the wet grass, her knees drawn up, clutching a small child tightly in her arms. Her thin jacket was drenched, sticking to her shivering body as sobs racked her frame. The rain fell relentlessly on her bowed head, soaking both mother and child, but she didn't seem to notice. The boy, no older than 2, clung to her with tiny fists gripping her collar. His face was buried in her shoulder, and though his small body was still, Eleanor could hear his faint whimpers. The billionaire froze. A wave of confusion swept over her like a cold tide. Who was this woman? Why was she here, crying so bitterly at Michael's grave? This was supposed to be her private moment. Every year, Eleanor made sure her visit to the cemetery was quiet and unseen. But this was different. Eleanor's heart began to pound. She felt something deep in her gut, an instinct she couldn't explain. Gathering her courage, Eleanor tightened her grip on her umbrella and took a step forward. The sound of her heels crunching on the gravel path made the woman flinch. "Excuse me," Eleanor said softly, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her chest. "Are you all right? Can I help you?" The woman's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face pale with shock. Her wide eyes met Eleanor's for a fleeting moment before darting away in shame. I didn't know anyone was here," she stammered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I'm sorry. I'll leave." She tried to stand, shifting the child to her hip, but Eleanor noticed how her hands trembled as she brushed away her tears, as if she was afraid to even look at her. Eleanor should have turned away. She should have let the woman leave and kept her grief private, but something stopped her. The little boy had lifted his head slightly, curious about the stranger standing nearby. And then Eleanor saw them, those eyes. Wide, innocent eyes. Deep brown like freshly turned earth. But it wasn't just the color. There was something about their shape, the way they caught the light, that made Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. She knew those eyes. They were Michael's eyes. Her heart skipped a beat. "Wait," Eleanor said, her voice sharper than she intended. The woman froze mid-step, clutching the child protectively. Her knuckles whitened on his tiny coat. Eleanor took a shaky breath and tried again, softer this time. "Please, who are you? And why are you crying here?" "This grave." Her eyes darted to Michael's headstone and back again. "This grave belongs to my son." The woman swallowed hard. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her gaze fell to the ground, avoiding Eleanor's piercing stare. The little boy whimpered and pressed his face back into his mother's neck. "Answer me," Eleanor urged gently but firmly. "Do you know my son?" The young woman's shoulders sagged. She let out a shuddering breath as tears pooled in her eyes again. "Yes," she whispered, so softly Eleanor had to strain to hear. Eleanor's stomach twisted. "Yes? What do you mean?" The woman looked up, and in her tear-streaked face Eleanor saw raw fear, and something else. Guilt. "I knew him," she said shakily. 3 years ago. He came into the diner where I worked. I was struggling to make ends meet and he was kind to me." Eleanor's chest tightened. "You knew Michael?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman nodded, clutching the boy even tighter. "I didn't plan for this to happen. We weren't together long, but we cared for each other." Eleanor's knees felt weak. Her fingers trembled on the handle of her umbrella. She forced herself to ask the question already forming in her mind. "This child," she said, her throat dry. "Is he?" The woman looked down at the boy, then back up at Eleanor, her eyes brimming with tears. "Yes," she said softly. "He's Michael's son." Eleanor felt the world tilt. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she stared at the boy again. The little one peeked at her shyly now, his tiny fingers still curled around his mother's collar. And for the first time Eleanor saw it fully. The curve of his smile, the little dimple on his chin. Michael's dimple. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth as tears burned her eyes. My grandson, she whispered. The young woman nodded silently, bracing for anger, rejection, anything. But Eleanor didn't shout. She didn't scold. Instead, she took a hesitant step closer, her heart breaking as she saw the fear in the woman's eyes. Why didn't you come to me? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me I had a grandson? I was scared, the woman admitted, choking back sobs. You're your Eleanor Grace. A billionaire. I'm just a waitress. I didn't think you'd believe me. I didn't want to bring shame to Michael's memory. Eleanor's tears flowed freely now, mixing with the raindrops on her cheeks. Shame, she whispered. No. You've given me the only piece of my son I have left. The boy looked at her curiously, and Eleanor dropped to her knees in the mud without a second thought. Sweetheart, she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. Do you know who I am? The child blinked at her, then murmured softly, Grandma. Eleanor's heart shattered and healed in the same instant. Yes, baby, she sobbed. Grandma's here now. And I'll never let you go. My name's Ava, and this is his son. Your grandson. The young woman hesitated for a moment, holding the little boy close to her chest as if afraid Eleanor might snatch him away. Her thin frame shook, not just from the cold but from the weight of what she was about to say. Slowly, she rose from the wet grass, her arms wrapped protectively around the child. Raindrops streaked her tear-stained face as she looked at Eleanor with a mixture of fear and determination. My name's Ava, she said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. I used to work at a diner near the university. Eleanor's mind began to race. The university. Michael's university. She remembered how her son used to talk about eating at small diners, because he didn't like the attention he got in upscale restaurants. He liked blending in, being treated like an ordinary person. Could it be? The pieces start to fall into place. Ava's lips trembled as she spoke again. 3 years ago I met Michael. It was late one night. My car broke down outside the diner, and everyone else had gone home. I didn't have anyone to call. She paused, blinking back tears. But Michael, he stopped. He didn't even know me, but he stayed with me until a tow truck came. He made sure I was safe. He was kind. So kind. Eleanor felt her breath catch. That sounded exactly like her son. Always helping people, even strangers. Ava tightened her grip on the boy. We started talking after that night. He'd come to the diner sometimes and, I didn't mean for it to happen, but I fell in love with him. Eleanor's gloved hand flew to her chest as a sharp pang gripped her heart. You loved my son? She asked, her voice shaking. Yes, Ava whispered. And this? She shifted the child slightly so Eleanor could see his face clearly. This is his son. Your grandson. Shock and recognition. Eleanor staggered back a step as if Ava had struck her. My grandson, she gasped. Her eyes darted to the little boy, who peered shyly at her from beneath thick lashes. And then she saw it, truly saw it. The boy's wide brown eyes. The curve of his lips when he offered a hesitant smile. Even the faint dimple in his left cheek. It was like staring at her son as a toddler. Michael. Tears blurred Eleanor's vision. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into the leather of her gloves as emotions she couldn't name clawed at her chest. A mother's fear. Ava's voice broke through her swirling thoughts. I didn't know how to tell you, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush now. And after Michael's accident, I was too scared. I'm just a waitress. Why would a billionaire believe me? Eleanor looked at her sharply, her grief now tangled with confusion and pain. You think I wouldn't believe you? Eleanor said softly, her voice trembling but steady. You think I wouldn't want to know about him? Ava's chin quivered. I thought maybe you'd hate me, that you'd think I was trying to take advantage. But I swear I never wanted your money. I only wanted my son to know where his daddy is. To let him feel close to him, even if he never got to meet him. Eleanor's knees buckled. She stumbled forward, barely catching herself before she fell. This was too much. 3 years of grieving her only child. And now this? The weight of love. The little boy, sensing the tension, clung tighter to Ava. But his big brown eyes stayed fixed on Eleanor. Micah? Ava murmured softly, stroking his curls. Baby, this is your grandma. Eleanor's heart twisted. Micah, she whispered. The name felt like sunlight and heartbreak all at once. You named him after Michael? She asked. Ava nodded. I wanted him to carry a piece of his father with him. Always. Eleanor pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. The tears she had fought to hold back now streamed down her cheeks freely. My God, she choked. You've been raising him, all alone? Yes, Ava admitted, her voice breaking. I work double shifts. Sometimes I don't even have enough for his medicine when he's sick. But I love him. I'd do anything for him. Eleanor's chest heaved as a sob escaped her lips. How could I not have known? A billionaire's vow. Eleanor took a shaky step forward, her designer shoes sinking into the mud, and looked Ava directly in the eyes. Listen to me carefully, she said, her voice trembling but fierce. I don't care if you're a waitress. I don't care about your past. That little boy. She pointed at Micah, her voice breaking. He is my grandson. And from this moment on, you're not alone anymore. Ava blinked in shock. What do you mean? I mean, Eleanor said, her eyes blazing through her tears, that I'm going to take care of him. Of both of you. He's family. Your family. Micah looked up at her with curious eyes, and Eleanor slowly reached out her hand. May I? She whispered. After a moment of hesitation, Ava nodded and gently placed the boy's tiny hand in Eleanor's gloved one. The touch was electric. Warm. Real. Eleanor knelt in the mud, pulling Micah into a tearful embrace. Grandma's here now, baby, she whispered against his curls. And I'm never letting you go. Micah. He deserves to know where his daddy rests. Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes as she stared at the boy. Her vision blurred, but she didn't dare look away, not even for a second. For the first time in 3 years she felt something stir in her heart. Slowly, carefully, she knelt down in front of the child, her designer coat soaking in the muddy grass. The boy flinched slightly, clutching his mother's neck, but Eleanor softened her gaze and whispered gently, What's his name? Micah, Ava said softly, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the falling rain. I named him after his father. Eleanor's breath caught. Micah. The sound of it made her chest ache. She reached out with trembling hands and brushed her gloved fingers against the boy's tiny hand. His skin was warm, delicate, so much like Michael's when he was small. Micah, Eleanor repeated, her voice breaking. A mother's plea. Suddenly Ava spoke, her words tumbling out in a rush. Please don't hate me, she said, her voice tight with fear and desperation. I didn't come here for money. I swear. I just wanted him to know where his daddy rests. He asks about him every night and I thought he deserved to know. Her arms tightened protectively around Micah, and for a moment Eleanor saw the fierce love in her eyes, the same love she herself had once felt for Michael. Eleanor's gaze dropped to Ava's shoes, scuffed and worn thin. Her clothes were modest, cheap fabric clinging to her rain-soaked frame. There were faint circles under her eyes, the unmistakable markers of exhaustion. It was painfully clear. Ava had struggled in ways Eleanor couldn't even begin to imagine. Two worlds collide. You've been raising him, Eleanor whispered, her voice almost lost to the wind. Raising him all this time without any help? Ava nodded, biting her trembling lip. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Yes, she admitted, her voice cracking. I work double shifts at the diner just to make ends meet. But sometimes, she hesitated, swallowing hard as if the truth pained her too much to say. Sometimes I can't even afford his medicine when he's sick. Eleanor felt something inside her shatter. She had spent millions on luxuries in the last 3 years. Exotic vacations she didn't enjoy. Jewelry that sat untouched in velvet boxes. Cars she never drove. All of it, trying to fill the gaping hole her son's death had left in her life. And all the while, her son's own flesh and blood, her grandson, had been living in hardship. The weight of guilt. Eleanor's trembling hand brushed against Micah's curls, and he peeked out at her with big brown eyes. Eyes that mirrored Michael's so perfectly they made her soul ache. Oh, my sweet boy, she whispered, her voice raw. You've been here all along. And I didn't even know. Her mind flashed with images. Micah coughing in the middle of the night while Ava sat up alone, trying to comfort him with no money for a doctor. Ava skipping meals so her son could eat. Holidays with no gifts, no family, no warmth. And Eleanor? She had been sitting in her mansion, drowning her grief in champagne. How could I not have known? The billionaire's realization. Ava's voice broke through her thoughts, quiet and almost apologetic. I wasn't going to tell you. I didn't want to disrupt your life. But every night when Micah asked about his daddy, I couldn't lie anymore. I thought maybe he deserved to visit him. Eleanor looked up sharply, tears streaming freely down her face now. You thought wrong, she said, her voice trembling but fierce. Ava flinched. You thought wrong because you and this boy, you're not disrupting my life. You are my life now. Ava blinked in confusion. Eleanor straightened slightly, though her knees still pressed into the soggy ground. Micah is my grandson. He's my family. And I failed him already by not knowing he existed. But I won't fail him again. A new vow. Micah shifted in Ava's arms, his tiny voice muffled as he asked, Mama, who is she? Ava choked back a sob and stroked his cheek. Baby, she's your grandma. Eleanor reached out again, her hand shaking, and cupped Micah's small face. Yes, darling, she whispered through her tears. I'm your grandma, and I promise you this. I will love you and protect you with everything I have. You'll never want for anything again. Ava's lips parted as if to protest, but Eleanor shook her head gently. No more double shifts, Ava. No more struggling. You've done enough. From now on we do this together. As a family. The rain fell softly around them as the billionaire and the waitress locked eyes. Two women from completely different worlds, bound forever by the little boy between them. And in that moment, Eleanor realized that for the first time in years, her heart felt full again. Grandma's here now. Eleanor stood slowly, her knees stiff from kneeling in the wet grass, but her eyes were blazing, not with anger or sadness, but with a fierce determination she hadn't felt in years. Ava, she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. You should have told me sooner. Ava's lips quivered as she held Micah close, her shoulders shaking slightly. She looked down ashamed, unable to meet Eleanor's piercing gaze. I didn't know how, Ava whispered. You're Eleanor Grace, the Eleanor Grace. A billionaire. And I'm just me. A nobody. Eleanor stepped closer, her designer boots sinking slightly into the mud. Rain trickled down her face, mixing with her tears. She reached out and gently placed a hand on Ava's shoulder. You're not a nobody, Eleanor said softly but firmly. You're the mother of my grandson. And that makes you family. Ava's eyes widened in surprise. It's not too late. Eleanor drew a deep breath, her chest rising and falling as though the weight of years of grief was lifting piece by piece. But listen to me, Ava, she continued, her voice gaining strength. It's not too late. I want to be part of his life. Micah deserves a future worthy of his father's name. And you deserve peace. Ava frowned, shaking her head slowly, her wet hair clinging to her face. But I don't want charity, she said, her voice trembling. I've worked so hard to keep him safe, to provide for him, even if it wasn't much. I can't let you feel sorry for me and swoop in just because you can. Eleanor's expression softened. She placed her other hand on Ava's arm and spoke with raw honesty. This isn't charity, Eleanor said, her voice breaking slightly. This is love. This is family. From today, Micah has a grandmother. And you finally have someone to lean on. Ava's breath caught. Her tears flowed freely now, but she didn't look away. The first grandma. Micah stirred in his mother's arms, his big brown eyes blinking up at Eleanor. There was curiosity in his gaze and something else too, an innocence that made Eleanor's heart ache. The little boy tilted his head slightly and gave a shy smile. Grandma, he said softly. The word struck Eleanor like lightning, warm and electric, filling every cold, empty corner of her heart. Yes, baby, she choked out, falling to her knees once again despite the mud and rain soaking through her expensive coat. Her trembling arms wrapped around the tiny child, pulling him close. Yes, my sweet boy. Grandma's here now. Micah didn't pull away. Instead, his small arms clumsily wrapped around Eleanor's neck as if he understood, in his own childlike way, that this woman wasn't a stranger anymore. A heart that heals. A sob escaped Eleanor's lips as she held Micah tightly. Years of loneliness, guilt, and unimaginable grief poured out of her in that moment. The void left by Michael's death had consumed her for so long that she had stopped believing it could ever heal. But as Micah's little heartbeat thudded against her chest, she realized something profound. Michael was gone, but a part of him lived on. This boy, this precious innocent boy, was a piece of her son, a gift she hadn't known she needed. Eleanor pulled back slightly to look at him, her tears mixing with raindrops as she cupped his small face in her hands. "You're so much like your daddy," she whispered, her voice full of wonder and sorrow. "He had your eyes, your smile, even that dimple in your cheek." Micah giggled shyly and buried his face in her shoulder. A silent vow. Eleanor looked up at Ava, who was still watching them with wide, tearful eyes. "You've done so much for him, Ava," Eleanor said softly. "More than I can ever thank you for. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. You're both mine to protect now. I promise you that." Ava opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, she nodded slowly, her tears flowing harder than ever. But this time they weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of relief. As the rain fell softly around them, Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment and made a silent vow. "I will protect them both. I will love them both. No matter what it takes, I'll make sure they never feel alone again." The beginning of forever. The sound of a car door opening broke the moment. Eleanor's driver stood by the black sedan, holding out an umbrella. "Ma'am," he called gently. Eleanor stood, wiping her tears but never letting go of Micah's tiny hand. "Come with me," she said, looking at Ava. "We'll talk more at home. You both need warmth, food, rest. And I need time to get to know my grandson." Ava hesitated, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Are you sure? You barely know us." Eleanor gave her a small, sad smile. "I know all I need to know," she said. "You loved my son. And this boy, he is my son's legacy. That's enough for me." As they walked toward the car, Eleanor glanced down at Micah and squeezed his hand gently. "Welcome to the family, little one," she whispered. And for the first time in years she felt whole. If you enjoyed this heartfelt story, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more emotional and inspiring content. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching.